Hey everyone, welcome to Crank It Up Podcast, the YouTube home of Brigand Games. I'm Jim Price, and this is my 6th designer diary entry focusing on balance and playtesting. Balance is incredibly important to a game, especially one that's variable player powers. If I've never explained it before, variable player powers is absolutely my favorite mechanic. I love it. It's in most of the games that I play. But inherently, if I'm good at something, it means that you have to be good at something as well. And there's the question, are those two things equal? It can matter based on the powers themselves, it can matter based on player count, it can matter based on any number of factors. I think we all agree that we try very hard for things to be balanced, and to some extent, it's impossible for something to be perfectly balanced. It's just never going to happen in a game of sufficient complexity. You try and get it as close as possible. It is, however, very possible for things to be unbalanced, and those are the type of games that you never want to play because it feels like the game is decided before it even begins. I've certainly had that experience in some games, and it's just simply a waste of time and not very fun. So we have thought very hard about how we want to go about playtesting the game, and I thought today I would share some of the things that we deem appropriate and how we're trying to solve some of the complexities of balancing a game where truly there's a lot going on. I think the first thing you have to do is you have to be honest with yourself about your goals. There is a lot going on in Erudia, mostly from the customization aspect. You're trying to playtest the classes, which are going to be 30 cards or 15 cards, but there's a lot of flexibility in there. Because of the depth of the classes, there are certain ways to play them, and that's going to influence the results. In some ways, that's a very good thing because no two games will feel alike. But also, the more ways that you can playtest a class, the more ways you can play a class, the harder it is to get a sense of the balance in an individual direction. Because when you're looking mostly at numbers, you have to say, okay, did you go down path A? Did you go down path B? When you have so many cards, which cards were the ones that were most important? This is very difficult. And overall, I would say that we collect a lot of data, even though we don't necessarily do everything with that data. From my perspective, especially as a developer, I find it's better to have data and not use it than to need data and not have it. Very often, someone will ask me, hey, do you think we can calculate this? And if I have the data for it, I'm going to definitely be able to do that. It's just a matter of writing another routine. And it's great that we're in that position. But we can't track everything because then it's going to be a nightmare to play games because it feels like you're doing more homework than anything. So it's all about finding the balance in your approach to actually finding balance. There are many variables that we care about in this game. There are things that we can control. There are things that we cannot control. How do you distinguish between the two? There are things that are historically important. From the moment that we first started keeping stats, things that will matter. There are things that are relevant only to the task at hand for the specific version. For example, if a class is doing well now, how it did when it first started really has no bearing because there would have been so much evolution if they changed radically to get from point A to point B. But something like first player win rate or the competitive score that we try and calculate, do those matter from varying versions to versions? The answer may be yes. So what kinds of data do we keep? Well, the first thing when you think about a game is you think about a score and who won. Erudia is a game where one player wins and one player loses. I love two-player games for that reason because either I win or you win. Sometimes maybe the game wins, but there's no king-making. It's a very clear outcome that one of us is going to win because of what we did or the mistake that you made. You don't have to worry about a third party influencing too much. Well, wins are very important, but is score very important? Well, that depends on the type of game. For a game like Erudia, where everyone has a chance to score points when a battlefield falls, the score may actually be telling you the wrong story. For example, we'll see a lot of games that have a difference of 4 points, maybe 16 to 12. That may look like, well, 4 points, that's 25% of the total score being a gap. That seems like it's a significant amount. But it's really not, depending on how the points were accumulated. Because that may be the difference between the last battlefield being solo and not being solo. If someone is scoring 4 and 2 and that pushes you to 16-12, that's a big difference and tells a different story than if it's a solo pushing a game that's 12-12 from 16-12. Very often, you'll find that a game will be a race. Because those second place points don't matter, it's almost going to be uncontested I can either slow you down on that battlefield or try to win faster on another one, because those points mean nothing to me. I don't want to help you at all accumulate your gold faster, especially if I can't swing it from you from the last moment. So while score is important and we track it, the score of an individual game can tell the wrong story. You really may be more concerned with average VP over several games. If a team is winning, 50% of the time, but their average VP is high, it seems like they are in seemingly every game, and that could be concerning because it means that they're scoring really high in the games that they aren't winning, and one thing here or there could be the difference between total domination. Again, if someone is losing more than they're winning, but their average VP is high, then it means that they're so close, they're always right on the precipice. And it's possible to see a situation where someone has a very poor record, but it feels like they're in every game. The poor record may indicate that they need a lot of help, but the truth is that because they're consistently competitive, they really only need a little bit of help, and that will push them over the edge. What other variables are very important? Well, from a historical perspective, I figured I would start there. One of the things that we've been tracking since the start of the game is the first player win rate. Now, in many games, there is a first player advantage, and it's very clear. Not as often, but more than you think, there's actually a last player advantage. And that's always been very interesting to me because it seems counterintuitive that, going last should be a bad thing, but it actually can be a very good thing. I think a game where you play an equal number of turns and the round ends, if a person can control the end of the game right then and there, that's a big advantage in my opinion. And I love going last in those games. Whether or not it's mathematically true doesn't matter. It's definitely what I feel in those games. Well, as of right now, the first player advantage historically is 51.2%. And I'm really proud of that. For the longest time, it had been around like the 50.8 range, but I'm not going to argue over a couple of decimal points here or there. That's great. Because there is an asymmetric setup, and because the game can actually undo what someone does on turn one, I think it's really important that we look at that number carefully and try and get it as close to 50% as possible. And that's great. Because, again, you do not want a game to be decided before it even begins. That can be frustrating. And if a first player is going to win more often than not at a significant amount, that's certainly, a luck of the dice. Well, you just happen to be going first, therefore you're going to have this big advantage. We want to try and actively prevent that, which we've done through asymmetric setup. Certainly the ability to draw one extra card matters, but also the fact that you can freely damage someone. If you go first, yes, you'll get a little bit of an advantage from a power standpoint, but you're also in a little bit of a bind from a damage standpoint because the person has a chance to damage you and you can't damage them first. And you think that that would even out over time, which is what's happening. Another thing that we track very seriously is the turn count. When you think about a game length, there's the number of turns and the amount of time that it takes. I can't control time because certain players will take longer than others. Though we have a consistent time when I play with a consistent opponent, which I feel great about, that really is subject based on the player. There's nothing I can do in short of instituting a clock to prevent someone from taking long turns every single time. And that can even distort the numbers if you're not being careful. So time isn't that meaningful, even though you have to put a time on the box eventually. But turns is something that I can control. By the strength that I give to each class, by the amount of available options that I can give to players, that's going to drive the turn count, and the turn count is much more likely to be consistent. And we're looking at a turn count in the 23 to 24 range, which is exactly where we want it to be. When you think about it from a pure draw perspective, there's a 50-card deck, and you're guaranteed to start with 6 or 7 of them. Let's call it 6. Well, if you're drawing 12 cards worth of cards, and that's 2 cards per turn, you're going to see a total of 30 of your 50-card deck without any card draw. And remember, there's free card draw with the deplete action and a lot of card draw in each class. What that means is that you're seeing 60 to 75% of your deck at a minimum, and that's a very good thing because it means that your deck has to be built to last, and it's not really subject to random draw. Yes, it will matter whether or not you see your leader, but there are tools that you can use to mitigate that, certain royal items, for example. But you can see that If the game is of a sufficient turn length, then your deck is really meaningful because you're using the majority of it, and therefore the order in which you draw things doesn't matter because losses now do not necessarily mean losses later. I'm perfectly comfortable playing from behind. I actually love playing from behind because it means that I can be efficient early on and then save all my bullets for the end. Sometimes it backfires because that turnover never happens, but that's part of the game. And certainly there are classes that are built around being second half classes where, they really want to play slow before they get going, and then they feel like they can overwhelm you. Well, for that to happen, you need a certain amount of game length, and 24 turns is certainly a good number in that regard. It's a sweet spot. So turns are very important. First player order is very important, and these are things that are historical. We track them from the beginning because the individual versions shouldn't matter too much. Those are things that we can count on from the very beginning. In the same vein, one of the things that we'll track in addition to score is the next player win rate, what is also called like a competitive score. So the score can be misleading. Like I said, 16 to 12 might seem like a large gap, but could the other player have won next turn? We actually ask all of our playtesters to answer that question because it's incredibly important. If to me the answer is yes, then that is a competitive game regardless of what the score is. If you're saying that, you won this turn, but I'm going to win next turn, doesn't matter what the score is, that game's competitive. Believe it or not, I was actually down 8 points and could have won next turn because of a double score, and I had a crazy plan in order to achieve it. The score would tell you that it wasn't close, but it actually was. He was just able to do one thing faster than I could. And so, we're looking at a 40 to 50% percentage for that, which is very good because it means that everyone is being competitive most of the time. Now, that stat is somewhat subjective, and I don't fully, endorse it because it's relying on someone to make an assessment. Could you have won or not? And sometimes people misinterpret it. We tend to get a lot more no's that should be yeses than yeses that should be no's. So like I said, I don't put too much stock into it, but it is something that we track because I consider it to be important. As far as the actual game, there are a number of interesting things that occur before the game that could actually drive the results of the game. For example, which acolytes are you taking? Certain counting stats, how often are you taking specific cards? Those are definitely things that we want to monitor. I design acolytes to have 3 good options that realistically, you can't go wrong with drafting A, B, or C. Sometimes it's a lot higher than that. Sometimes it's not. Again, I can't force people to draft the acolytes that they like. For example, there are some that seem like auto draft, even though I don't personally subscribe to that theory. And again, I can't tell you who to draft. It's the same thing with royal items. But we want to know, does it even out over time? If there is 100% of the games, everyone's taking the same person, that's a little concerning. It means that there's too much weight into one person, and in a game where you have direct access to that one person, what's the point of having a choice if everyone's going to make the same choice? It also means that if you don't take that person, that could, poorly reflect on the balance because all the numbers are tied into the strength of that individual person. And again, the same thing goes for royal items. If you've been watching the videos based on who people draft, you get a better sense of, okay, what are the average rates? What are the individual rates? Letting those metas form. And we certainly gain a lot of information by then. But more importantly, with something like the royal items, we can track, okay, how often are the items being drafted and how often are those items winning the game? Now, we do have to account for the fact that if 2 players take an item, one of them is going to win the game. But more often than not, the statistic works because there are going to be differences between them. And you can see that the numbers are very good in the 50 to 60 range because someone has to win the game. But there's nothing like an 80 or 90%. There's no consensus royal item that, you must always take and that it's proving to be a dominant factor. That's extremely important. And that's certainly something that we want to track during the balance of the game. You have to be very careful how to balance items that everyone can take versus cards that you draft specifically. Battlefields can also play a crucial role. One of the things that we do at the battlefield is we track, okay, what are the power levels each time before it scores? If something is 25 resistance, well, is that 13 and 12? Is it 20 and 5? Is it 25 solo? We want to know all those answers. We track not only the outcome, but the power that's before, because some factions live and die based on swinging battlefields. Well, we want to know how much are they swinging. Are they swinging by 2? Are they swinging by more? I think the most I've ever swung a base by was something by like 16, because I had the perfect storm going, and it was really rewarding because I set up that play, but you want to be able to quantify it if needed. Another thing you have to consider is how often is the battlefield actually being captured? Is it stale? If you have a battlefield that has a great ability, but no one's ever really breaking it or having any incentive to play there, that's concerning because you don't want a dead battlefield. There's only 4 at any given time, and the more dead ones you have, the more that you're constricting the playing field, and then it's kind of ruining the whole point of the adjacency system if no one wants to go anywhere. So we monitor that very carefully. How often is it appearing? How often is it being captured? A really crucial statistic is how often is the winning player actually winning the game? Now, this statistic is very difficult to calculate because, well, not to calculate, but to interpret, because the winning player will win more battlefields than they don't. The whole point is someone is going to win, so this number should definitely be higher than 50%. But if it's too high, in let's say 100%, just in a theoretical sense, that would be bad. That would be dominant. You don't want 100%. Where exactly do you want that number to be? Well, that really depends on a number of factors. Is 75% too high? Is 80 too high? Certainly, you want to try and get that number down closer to the 50% range to show that, okay, it's not about the individual battlefields that matter, it's about the quantity of battlefields to avoid the dominant effect. It's really interesting to see when a battlefield is very popular, you would think that the most popular battlefield would actually be the highest points. But it turns out that the most popular battlefield is actually our 2-0 bridge. One player is going to get 2 points, another player is going to get 0, and it's a seesaw battle because of the way the bridge works. That's absolutely fascinating because it's not offering a lot of points, but it's offering point differential, and that's what's crucial. And because it's so easy to get, if your rival ignores it, you really can't ignore it, and that it just functions like a magnet, and I love that. Because it's a bridge that has an objective, you want to be able to track, okay, how often are the objectives actually hitting? This is important because the objectives are different, and by design, some objectives are designed to hit more often than others. Bridges, I definitely would expect to hit more. Caves, I would expect to hit more. But mountains, based on unit quantity, that's a lot harder because the more units that you have, the more power you have, the more likely that you're going to break it regularly. But if you can pull off a strategic objective when the power is smaller, that could be really interesting, and you want to see, okay, where is that number actually falling, and who are the ones that are actually hitting it? For example, a swarm faction would definitely benefit it because they would have lots of smaller units. You want to see, okay, when the objective is breaking, are they overrunning it? Are they soloing it? Can I just be like drop a bunch of units and burst that base out of nowhere? Hopefully not. It's also one of the reasons why we gave those battlefields a 4-3 split. That way, even if you do find a way to overwhelm the base quickly, the second player is still going to get a decent amount of points, and therefore you can play there, and as long as you can hold your position, you'll get a lot of value there. So I've talked a lot about items and battlefields, but what about the actual classes themselves that make up the majority of the game? What do we do specifically to balance those? Numbers are very important, but they don't tell the entire story, and numbers can mislead you if you have no context for them. That's why I believe it's very important that not only I'm involved in as many games as possible, but that the players are also playing each other so that they can compare notes and we can have real-time conversations. One of the best things that we do is the ability to have conversations in real time, compare notes, and really just brainstorm off of each other. Feeling matters tremendously because when I look at data, when I look at numbers, the feeling is devoid of it. I can draw my own conclusions from the numbers. If you contextualize the numbers, then it tells a different story, and I can look at the numbers with a different perspective that may say, okay, I really see what's going on here. Also, the numbers are an individual event, but strength is not based about any one individual game. it's on a collection of experience, and that's where the discussion is going to happen. If you're consistently seeing the same thing happen over and over again, then that's something that's best determined through conversation. If a card feels individually too strong, or if a card doesn't feel strong enough, conversation is where that's going to come out. And so we talk a lot. Sometimes we'll correlate it with the numbers. Being a developer, I have the advantage of being able to pull numbers on the fly from the data. So sometimes people will say, well, what about this? We'll go back to the numbers. Do we have that data? We'll run the report. We'll say what the numbers are, and then we'll talk about that. Do we accept these results or not? Sometimes a class that will be, undervalued by the numbers will actually be fine from a feeling perspective. In terms of balance, there's a couple of conclusions that can be drawn. One is that a faction is balanced and it's where it should be. Another one is that it's mathematically saying that it's balanced, but it's not in fact balanced at all. Another one could be that the numbers are bad, but players are playing them wrong. There's a certain complexity that goes on to it. That's why your own individual perception and the collection of perceptions is so crucial, and why we put such an emphasis on the team perspective. It's because of that team perspective that I wanted to close by saying that if these concepts interest you at all, and I haven't been able to go into everything that we talk about, I feel like I can do several videos on our playtesting and balance approach, but if you're interested in playtesting, if you're interested in balance, we have some upcoming opportunities for you to join the team in one of two capacities. We're working on our demo version, and we're going to be able to get the demo version out hopefully very soon with our actual rulebook, which means that we're going to be needing blind playtesters. If you're not familiar with the term, a blind playtester is going based solely on the rulebook. They have no other resources available to them. They go in blind. It's basically playtesting the rulebook in the context of the game to make sure that the rulebook is clear, and we need a lot of volunteers from that. We'd be happy to have you for that. We also do have a limited number of balanced playtesting spots for people who are able to contribute a little bit more and like the challenge of playing multiple times and forming their own opinions and tying it in with the overall narrative that the data is showing. Regardless of what you're interested in, I've created a link where you can declare your interest and start the process. There's a little bit of information that we need to know about you in order to determine, okay, what's the best fit for the team. The link is going to be in the description of the video. It's playtest.brigandgames.com. If you are interested, I'd love to talk to you, get some more information, and see, okay, how can we bring you into part of the team? We have a great team of playtesters who have worked so hard to bring you a quality experience. And one of the things that, we can say at Brigand Games is that, we really want our team members to feel like team members. We want people to be involved in the process, to feel like they're a part of the team, to be able to contribute on actual content that makes it into the game. I've spoken before about custom content and the ability to have your ideas directly put into the game. I thought I'd close by sharing a recent story. We've been bringing on people incrementally throughout the process. We had someone join recently who's already had a major impact. It's kind of funny because we were debating one card that has a very high ceiling. The floor, unfortunately, is that it's a dead card, and I don't like dead cards. And so the class overall is doing really well. So how do you fix this card without busting the balance too much? And we're really trying to brainstorm. And this new person comes in with a new perspective, has only played 2 games, and said, well, what if we did this? And it's sort of a left field idea that I hadn't even remotely considered. And it's like, that's the idea. That's what we're looking, that's what we're trying to do. And we actually took it, modified a little bit further, and created something that we're really excited about that, although it doesn't impact the balance too much, changes the way that you actually would look at the class and just makes them a little bit more accessible, and really excited about that change. And that came from someone, who is relatively new to the team. And that's great because it shows that, people who work hard and buy into what we're trying to do can have an immediate impact. And that's so exciting. I know I covered a lot of information, but hopefully this is important to you or exciting to you. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think about all these things in the comments. Let's shut it down.